Hey, so I just wanted to record a quick introduction to this. I'm finally uploading onto YouTube the episodes of American Vampire, which is a podcast that I've been co-hosting with Briana Finegan, talking about the Twilight franchise. We've been doing this at a leisurely pace since 2017, and I'm finally just kind of gradually uploading all of that content that's available in all of the places where podcasts happen. I'm also uploading it up here to YouTube. So this is mostly going to be like not video content, but I figured I'd stick in a little intro here at the beginning. So what you're about to listen to is the first episode, which we recorded in 2017, and is our discussion before we actually get into reading the books. The format for the podcast going forward is that Briana rereads a section of a book as I read it for the first time, and we talk about it, and then we move on to the next section. There's a lot of yelling, generally speaking, and we have a good time kind of talking about the metaphorical functions and kind of ideological underpinnings of what's going on in these texts. But this first episode is us chatting about our kind of prior knowledge and prior relationship to the Twilight franchise and related texts before we jump into it. So I hope you enjoy it and keep an eye out for the following episodes. I'll probably make like a playlist somewhere. Thanks for listening. We're going to talk about Twilight.
Yeah, very important text in my life. I am Briana, for those of you who do. Also, that's how you pronounce my name, everyone who's not from the Philadelphia area.
Briana.
It's in between the pronunciations you think they are.
Briana.
Close enough.
And this is Sid. I have never read the Twilight books. I have never seen the movies. I have seen enough advertising associated with it. And I guess I've seen the movie of 50 Shades of Grey, which ostensibly began as Twilight fanfiction, right?
Big mood. Yep,
so, like,
Masters of the Universe. Can you just briefly, I'm a real Twilight apologist, but, like, I can't fuck with that shit.
Yeah.
That's, like, well beyond my ability to retcon.
It's not
morally.
Good.
It's messy and bad.
If it were actually sexy at all, that could possibly redeem it, but it really isn't, so it is just unforgivable.
Yeah, like, Twilight's about abuse and doesn't know it, but it's also not super literal about it.
50 Shades is essentially like a primer on how not to do BDSM good.
It's bad and, like, embarrassing.
And also, like, two people who are obviously not actually attracted to each other trying to act their way through it poorly.
100% the most interesting part of that whole movie is how much they personally disliked each other.
Again, just from my, like, consumption of, like, tabloid media, I get the sense that at least is a center of the Venn diagram between the 50 Shades movie and the Twilight films. Like, a weird lack of chemistry among the actors.
Sure, I think it's, like, a little bit less egregious in Twilight. Twilight's just, like, requires people to be really earnest about things that are very, very goofy. And not goofy in the same way as, like, my playroom, as if I, like, literally have never met a single person in my life who, like, owned a piece of leather in any capacity. It's like, no, we're playing vampire baseball and it's really cool. We have matching uniforms.
Wait.
Oh, what's our rule about spoilers for this?
That's an important question. Is how we're going to address this, because, like, plenty of things I have been spoiled about,
sure.
Right? Although that was a new one.
I can't believe no one told you about vampire baseball.
Maybe let's, as we kind of go through, try not to get ahead of ourselves in terms of what we're talking about.
I will try to keep my, like, asides to the audience at a minimum.
Fair.
The dramatic ironies of noted Twilight scholar.
Right, which I'm sure are many.
It's not like the plot really matters in these books. Really more of an impressionistic, emotional landscape of sadness.
I mean, I'm not really reading this for plot, because I feel like the basic idea is, like, a vampire has sex with a high schooler, and there's also a werewolf
There's a werewolf and also a demon baby at some point, and I don't know, trauma or something. That's the gist of what I understand these books to be about.
Yeah, it's not that you're not wrong. That's not an unreasonable set of
That's
assumptions
the
to go on.
impression I have gotten.
God, you're gonna hate this so much.
Oh, I'm so excited.
You're like really gonna be livid.
Yes.
But you are very well versed in like vampire literature and film in general, probably more so than I am.
As an actual goth, I guess.
Noted goth.
I started watching vampire-related films and reading vampire-related texts at a pretty young age. I got pretty deep into the horror genre in late elementary school or early middle school. There was a period of time where I read a lot of best horror stories of 1994 compendiums.
Seems like that would be a chef kiss. Good
so
year.
Good. Ugh.
A fine
Primo
vintage.
vintage, indeed.
Anne Rice was back on her bullshit.
Yeah, and of course I was very deep into the Anne Rice books, the Vampire Chronicles, as it were. I started, but I don't think I ever finished at one point, a paper in high school comparing Anne Rice to Honoré de Balzac. Because they both like to describe the interiors of people's homes in great excruciating detail as a way to convey information about their personalities.
Stieg Larsson does that. Stieg Larsson is really into listing the brands and prices in Swedish kroner of various convenience store foods.
Huh. The exchange rate is what, 8 to 1?
I have no idea. I didn't understand anything that was happening whenever he talked about a commodity. And I was like, I guess that is money.
Part of why I'm into vampire shit is because I was a goth from a very young age because my dad is a goth and is a bit of a connoisseur of horror movies, especially of B horror movies. So I've seen many, many vampire movies. Probably my favorite being The Lost Boys, a 1987 film that is really just excellent. So that's part of why it's surprising that I've never delved into the Twilight franchise.
Well, it is and it isn't, because I feel like Twilight fits into this related but still fundamentally separate genre of teen supernatural romance.
I feel like it's in the same wheelhouse as what is it, The Vampire Diaries? There's also that
excellent
one.
television show.
And then there's also the slightly more mature vampire show that still feels like it's the same vibe that I still haven't
True
watched.
Blood?
Yeah.
Noted period piece, because the last season was set in 2011.
Oh god, that year that didn't happen.
Yeah, well, we can watch True Blood sometime and figure out from a historical document what happened, since we weren't there.
Right. But yeah, I don't know why I did not ever feel
well, because it's operating more within the YA conventions of the really, because it is one aimed at a younger audience than Anne Rice even is.
Totally.
Because Anne Rice is a very serious adult. So much of my relationship to Twilight is just being Stephenie Meyer is this absurd savant who produced this material without I don't know, which seems so disrespectful. I'm sure she's a lovely woman and she's a functional adult who's richer than God and could buy and sell me multiple times over. But I don't imagine her being oh, I'm really into YA lit. I'm gonna read all of these books and be familiar with this market and I'm gonna write something kind of hitting the beats of this particular type of book. I think she was just freely flowing, unfiltered, whatever was going on with her. And I don't process these books as something that had a lot of reflection, which is why they're so interesting to me.
They don't feel like a marketing team was put together to develop this book.
It feels
and
like this one really weird woman did not know that she was working through some stuff, but was maybe working through some stuff. And the author is dead, obviously. The author is also a teen vampire.
At some point we can quote from The Death of the Author
about,
as we reflect
Stephenie
upon
Meyer's
Twilight.
intentions are deeply irrelevant to me.
Right.
Even more so than in most texts, but I don't get the sense from reading them that she had a lot of real grand ideas about who her audience was.
Not having an agenda about cornering a particular market.
Right, it's clearly written for young people, but also Stephenie Meyer is a Mormon mom.
We'll get into that time that I was on a boat with 23 Mormons and my ex-boyfriend and got heat exhaustion. We'll get into that later.
Yeah, maybe you will relate to Bella. That feels like a very Bella Swan anecdote, frankly. These people who are strange and ominous are all together sharing the same worldview and experience, and I am an interloper, and this person whose relationship I am not always certain of, and whom I am currently fixated on, is like maybe ignoring me, and then also my frail body. Bella faints at least once that I can think of.
Probably have at least that one thing in common.
Yeah. A lot of people don't like Bella. Partly because of the, like, way that heterosexuality, like, splinters our ability to even, like, process female brains. Like,
Yes.
Interiority is, like, hard when we're all, like, picking a team and rooting for them.
Right.
Because she's not always a very good self-insert. Which I think is actually to Stephanie Meyer's credit. Like, she does have a personality. The personality is, like, sort of weird and boring. But in a way that I personally think is compelling. And we know for a fact that Kristen Stewart gets it. I gave her so much shit for not smiling. She's like, point to me in the book where Bella smiles.
Not a once, I
Not
assume.
a single time.
Yeah.
God bless her. Our sullen, confirmed Virgo.
Oh my god. Yeah. Okay, so I think part of why I never really got into the books is because I was, like, already a snobby goth.
I'm not a real or a fake goth. Like, I got nothing. I was only listening to classic rock.
Amazing.
I have only ever been like this. Me and my super tramp greatest stuff.
So I think part of it was like oh yeah, well, I've been reading about Eastern European legends of vampirism since I was in elementary school. I don't need, like, this pop franchise to tell me what vampires are like. I know. So I think there's, like, a little bit of, like, adolescent snobbery, but I think also it's partially, like, a timing thing in terms of age.
Yeah, no, it's very micro-generational. I am, like, a little bit on the older end of, like, people who got hit by the Twilight pummeling. Well, there was, like, the moms, but that was a whole other thing. You know, they can do whatever they want.
Right.
But in terms of people who, like, were teens, I read these books the summer that I turned 19.
Okay.
Which was the summer after my first year of college, when I was just really just, like, 2008 through 12 was kind of like, swoop, nothing good. Nothing good going on there. Just a lot of screaming.
You know, same for some of that, but I was just older.
Exactly. Like, it was like, I was home for the summer after my first year of college, and I was, like, working at Kmart and, like, just, like, fully isolated, like, working 1 p.m. to 10 p.m. And then I would just, like, wake up at, like, noon and then go back to work.
Oof.
And it's like, cool. Love living at the Kmart.
Yikes.
So I ended up buying them, like, in an airport because we were going to, like, Florida or something. We were going on, like, some kind of trip to see family. And I, like, didn't know what it was, which is the thing that I most remember about it, because it was before it hit critical mass in terms of pop culture saturation.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's a striking cover. And, like, I feel like I've seen this cover before. I feel like I heard someone talk about this and, like, read the back, and I was like, oh, yeah, whatever. Like, let's do it. And then I consumed them in a horrifyingly intense period of time. Because that was actually the summer the 4th book came out. So I finished the first 3 and then had to, like, wait for the last book to come out. But I had too much pride to, like, pre-order it. So it was, like, me being driven around to bookstores on that day trying to find this goddamn book. So embarrassed. Because at this point, we were visiting my grandparents, and now we're in South Carolina. There's no bookstores. It's just, like, the Walmart. So we're calling ahead to the Walmart, because Barnes & Noble was, like, cleaned out by the time they opened. Everyone had pre-ordered, everyone else came and cleaned them out, and they're like, no, like, you're really not understanding how popular this book is. And I was like, I'm really trying to play it cool about my whole situation here. Like, could someone please just give me the book so I have to stop asking people for it?
Did you feel self-conscious about that?
I did. A little bit. Mostly because my dad was like, this is so dumb. These books sound super dumb. I'm driving you around to all of these places to try and find this book, and, like, no one has it.
Which also feels like a real encapsulation of, like, teen dependence on other people to
real
facilitate their
real
agency.
Whole situation. I had to wait, like, another day. I was, like, really cranky about it.
I don't doubt it.
And then that fall, the first movie came out. So it was, like, weirdly intense timing for me to kind of, like, in one fell swoop, kind of read all of the books and have a lot of feelings of it. And then the movie came out, and then, like, the internet presence became, like, very intense and widespread. And then the backlash, and then the counter backlash, and then the counter backlash, and it's just like the sex positivity fights all over again. And it's like we're all so exhausted. What does feminism even mean anymore? Words aren't real.
See, I managed to like really miss like
Probably
all
you
of
weren't
that.
on LiveJournal.
I was on LiveJournal.
You were
but
not in the same part of LiveJournal that I was. Well, were you into Harry Potter fandom?
Well, so what it is that I was on LiveJournal for a long time, but I was probably already off LiveJournal by this point because I first joined LiveJournal in like, I don't know, the year 2002 maybe.
So this is like 2008 to 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Like LiveJournal, like before people kind of switched to other platforms. It was like before Tumblr really kind of latched on. LiveJournal is still where a lot of this is happening. I had been pretty deep. No, I can't say that. That would be me being a poser. I was adjacent to the Harry Potter fandom. I was not a true ride or die, but like I was there. I was like in the right places for like fandom things to be like switching into a new thing collectively.
Yeah, so whereas like I had kind of stepped away from like internet fandom in the early 2000s.
Which seems fine.
Because I was actually very deep into the Stephen King fan message boards that was on the Simon & Schuster like publishing house website. They had message boards.
This is some real goth shit right here.
And so I was like, I don't know, like 11 or 12 or something, like writing collaborative fan fiction with people on the internet about the Dark Tower and set at the Six Flags in New Jersey.
That rules.
That's like peak like 6th grade Sid Branca.
That's so good though.
But so, and I think by the time I was like in high school and then college, because I started college in 2005.
I knew that with my brain. I don't know why my face did that.
I am about to turn 30.
No, I'm like 20. Like you're not that much older than me. Like I don't know why.
Right, but when it comes to like kind of teen time,
Right,
it
like your
matters.
formative years, like every year is an entire lifetime.
Yeah. So when I started college, I was in college from 2005 to 2009, and my relationship to the internet was a little bit different.
Yes,
then.
it makes sense that you were just like not in the spaces where all of this discourse was happening.
I think at UChicago at that point in time, there was an attitude of like, that's not a worthwhile academic interest.
Sure, and I think I historically have reacted against that pretty strongly in like a lot of capacities. Like I'm very into reclaiming trash.
Oh yeah, and I would agree, but it took me some time to come to that.
And I also like I came to the books very earnestly. Like
Yeah.
I went through like my whole own journey. Was like I love these books because I am reading them and they are like crack to me. Like this is bad for me, and I know that it's like bad, but I'm compelled to read them very rapidly and like very intensely and be like very fixated on them right now. Like this is all my brain wants or cares about. And then I kind of like finished them and was able to like remove slightly, and then like engaging with like other people, and I was like, oh, we're all kind of like making jokes. Like, yeah, I guess this is a little silly. I guess this is maybe not like the best plot or relationship dynamics that I have seen in fiction. Maybe let's do some reflection on what's going on in these books. And then I eventually turned like yet another corner, which we will get to as it unfolds for you. And also you've been around me when I'm yelling at parties.
Totally.
About
your willingness to fight strangers at parties about the Twilight books and or films.
I just men are so tedious all the time, but like don't come in for your low-hanging fruit. Like I'm gonna let you like, oh, like this dumb thing that teen girls like no, square up. Like I'm not.
Yeah, I do think it's a valid point that they're not taken seriously, not just because they're about vampires, but because they're about vampires in a way that is written to appeal to like young women and like moms.
Yeah. No, it's a very specific kind of fantasy that I think a lot of people find embarrassing, women included. But like it's not embarrassed about itself. Like that I think ultimately is why I am still very compelled by it, is that it's like a deeply unself-conscious text.
So it's kind of unapologetically this sort of trite femme fantasy text.
That's also horrifying. But it doesn't realize it. It thinks it's the book's understanding of, like, what it's about is, I think, ultimately very different from what it's actually about. And, like, that tension is very interesting to me.
Like, it thinks it's about romance when it's actually horror.
When it's actually just about PTSD.
Things that are appealing to teen girls are not generally given the critical analysis that is their due.
Which is foolish, because teen girls make or break most pop culture.
Like, in terms of, like, the driving force within cultural capitalism.
Yeah. Like, in terms of people who are, like, willing to really enthusiastically like things and like things with their money.
But, you know, misogyny.
Turns out. Plot twist.
No one is respected less than girls.
And, like, no one is respected less than a woman who can be mocked for her own internalized misogyny. If that's, like another twist of the knife that's happening here. Surely you have seen the memes of, like, very strong female character TM versus, like, Bella Swan noted wet blanket. Where it's, like, Buffy or Hermione or, like, Katniss. We're like, oh, like, you're being so... Like, I did all this cool, badass stuff, and you, like, cried because a boy hurt your feelings. And I was like, you can all meet me in the pit. Like, actually, all of these characters are deeply traumatized. And, like, violence doesn't make your trauma not real.
Oh man, there's a whole other world of things that could be said about Buffy. She's, like, been trained to be a sociopath since a young age, so, like, come on.
Right?
Like that's not a fair comparison.
None of these people are doing great with their emotions.
Yeah.
Like,
no.
Most of them, again, night terrors, canonically.
Well, because when you regularly murder beings with your bare hands...
Right,
and
then we get into the people who, like, commit violent acts being traumatized as them being seen as, like, frequently more legitimate than people on the receiving end of violent acts and, like, their trauma. Which is, like, often gendered, and then it, like, becomes even weirder when you have, like, the separate trope of, like, strong female character, which is whether or not any of the characters I even just talked about, like, are that, like, one-sided sort of parody idea of, like, what a strong female character is are a little bit more easily digestible. In terms of, like, what we want from, like, masculine traded but, like, still very feminine looking women that appear in fiction.
I'm gonna, like, do, like, a Roadhouse style, like, bar fight
like,
kick to the face, but I'm wearing
backflip.
Right, but I'm wearing really cute heeled boots while I do it.
Right.
A Bella type character is representative of the aspects of femininity that we are taught to hate.
And she also, like, doesn't have powers in the way that, like, she is literally physically, undeniably, like, weaker and more vulnerable than the people around her.
Right.
And, like, sometimes that's just a reality.
Right.
And,
like not everyone is
mad
the
at
Slayer.
people about it is, like, maybe not super productive.
Right. And is maybe super ableist in addition to being sexist.
Yes.
Yeah, the idea that if a vampire is finna bite you, like, that you could ever resist that, and that there would be, like, a plausible scenario in which you fought and won, as opposed to, like, letting it happen.
Right, or, like
it's
whatever...
totally unrealistic in terms of, like, how human and vampire physiology operate.
Yeah, there's some really great dialogue for you on that particular front. Get excited about that scene. And also just, like, a thing that is, like, a more general tenet that I, like, feel in the world, that not everyone agrees with me, I know, but, like, regardless of, like, your own behavior towards or, like, relationship towards a person, like, them abusing you doesn't become okay just because you are, like, maybe leaning into it.
Right.
Like, they're still responsible for their actions. Like, you're not... Like, that's always true. Like, the person who's hurting you should always just not do that.
Absolutely.
How you respond to it or, like, engage with it or even feel about it doesn't necessarily, like, enter into that equation of, like, or you could just not be abusive.
Right.
So, like, her being in love with this person who's, like, bad and dangerous for her doesn't give him, like, carte blanche to just kill her.
I think part of the weird embarrassment, attraction, repulsion thing happening with this text is feeling weird about being attracted to people who might kill you as a general thing.
Yeah. Dating men's a trip.
Yeah. The idea that, like, serial killer hot is a thing. And a thing that I am totally susceptible to.
Sure. Well, that's also, like, if you're gonna be good at your job of being a serial killer, you have to be compelling in some way.
Right. Totally.
Right? Like, it's not like the girls who are, like, falling into that trap are acting in a vacuum. You're reacting to this, like, set of traits or, like, certain appeal.
Absolutely.
That is, like, older than any of us.
Right.
I feel like it's important for me as the person who's coming into this as, like, no, I'm the expert. Should probably, like, clarify what that means.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just, like, am a person who has, like, read these books and, like, I've probably watched the movies more than I have read the books, but I'm, like, have been very deep and immersed in all of this media. I've seen, like, everything in theaters when it came out. Have gone real deep into the think piece wormhole about it. And I think, like, more where my feeling of protectiveness about the text comes from, like, sort of interrogating, like, what I was getting out of it and, like, what is the emotional reaction that, like, people are having to these books. Like, what is the root of this that is making it so compelling for such a really huge group of people very suddenly and then, like, not anymore, because they don't have staying power. They're not popular books now. I think if you talk to, like, the average teen or tween, they would be like, oh yeah, whatever, I guess I've heard of it. Like, it's not a book that I think is gonna be long-term influential in the way that I think Harry Potter has staying power in like a sort of, these are children's books that we will read to our children and we will kind of, like, grow up with them and, like, give them to another generation. Twilight was kind of like a weird flash of everyone being super fucked up at once, and we all kind of got embarrassed about it afterwards. Like, I feel like the people who are still talking about Twilight are the people who were into it when it came out. Like, I don't really get the sense that new readers are coming to these books.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is, like, a stigma. Like, I think they became, like, a really sort of heavily coded cultural object. I think they, like, came to represent something very, very different by the time everything had, like, run its course. And it was like, okay, like, this is done, this is a punchline, this, like, doesn't exist as itself anymore. It exists, like, as a symbol of a very particular kind of book.
I would agree. And I think part of why, like, later on, I didn't involve myself in this franchise was because it had come to kind of represent a certain kind of, like, repressed feminine sexuality as a signifier.
I, as, like, a personal politic, think that, like, the concept of repressed female sexuality is, like, already offensive to me. So, like, I'm, like, already ready to fight. But, like, yes, I think
right.
you're absolutely right. That, like, well, because that was the other joke, is that it's for all the, like, undersexed wives and, like, all of the weird, sad moms who, like, aren't getting their husbands to have sex with them anymore, which is, like, super insulting and misogynist.
That, the fact that there are, like, tits in every single movie ever doesn't get framed as, these are all
these
these
undersexed men.
Dads. Yeah.
Which, zoinks. Tell me more about those countdown clocks for 18-year-old actresses.
Ooh.
Please don't. I don't ever want to hear about them again.
Yeah.
But I think that is also another aspect of, like, Twilight as cultural phenomenon, was this idea that, like, women and teen girls are too dumb to know that something's bad.
That, like,
they're too dumb to know that it's sexist. They're too dumb to know that it's problematic in this way. Like, I have to explain to these other, like, imaginary stupid readers, like, why this book, this thing that they like, is, like, morally unacceptable or, like, isn't feminist. As if that's, like, a useful way to talk about anyone's politics or feminism or anything.
I feel like a lot of that kind of criticism is coming from the same people who, like, will happily watch a Roman Polanski movie and talk about how, yes, I can be a critical fan, right? I can appreciate something, and then I can also be critical of these other aspects about this thing.
Yes. But, like, women are never afforded that benefit of the doubt. Like, it's kind of assumed that everyone who was reading Twilight was taking it completely at face value and was not, like, engaging with it in any kind of thoughtful way. Which, like, maybe some people weren't, but, like, that's their business. I'm not your dad. Like, do whatever you want.
Yeah, and I think that is very frequently how pop culture content, that especially that is popular among young women, is talked about.
There was, like, a lot of concern trolling about, like, the youths and the messages they were getting about relationships. And it's like, well, maybe we can all agree that these books are about abuse, but, like, we don't necessarily have to, like, police how people are engaging with that, or that they, like, don't get it. I think that, generally speaking, teens read way more than adults do. Like, they're getting other content, they're probably gonna be okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's being diluted with like some other stuff, or they're reading Wuthering Heights and they're getting really fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concern is not, oh, there's content out there that is representative of abusive relationships and doesn't call it that. I think it's more like, are they getting any other content that is indicative of what a non-abusive relationship might look like?
Sure. Well, like, are they?
Right.
Is there?
Right. That's
is maybe I think the bigger like, is there?
Does that exist?
Where are the healthy straight couples? Blink if you're okay.
So maybe we should talk about if we have any goals for this process.
I honestly, I will feel accomplished if I get you through this whole series, because they're like, I think another thing we got to get out of the way right off the bat, it's not good writing. Which, like, I don't care. Like, that's irrelevant to me. I'm have a lot of water in my chart, so I'm like only here for feelings.
I'm sure I'm gonna have so many feelings about so many writing choices. You would think that it would be easier for me to get past bad writing because I'm someone who reads a lot of fan fiction.
But, like, fan fiction is often good.
Yeah. Because, like, I'm kind of choosy even about, like, the raunchy / fiction that I read. To circle back to Twilight, I think a huge part of vampire mythos, right, or like the emotional context of vampires in literature and other cultural content is about navigating the death drive, like navigating the desire to get murdered by someone hot, or like the desire to confront your own mortality and like the physicality of that. These vivid descriptions of what is essentially like the process of dying and then kind of being brought back from the edge of that with like this gross like blood process. And I think that comes from our sort of fascination with and desire to engage with death and dying and murder and kind of wanting to know what that feels like.
Which is also, again, like a very easy and obvious metaphor for sex, particularly when it's a teen vampire romance.
Sure, because like also like vampirism and that kind of transformation is also generally like a metaphor for like adolescence and like sexual awakening and like your body is changing and like, oh my god, werewolves, don't even get me started.
Oh, we'll get you started.
I'm growing hair in strange places and I feel weird.
Yeah, it's like pretty racist how that plays out, but like we'll get there when we get there.
No.
I mean, you can't be shocked.
I'm not surprised, I'm just displeased.
Well, that's as we all are.
Ooh. So I guess in terms of if I have any goals for this process, what I would like is to kind of come out of this feeling like I understand why this has been such a compelling cultural object for so many people and with such intensity, and far more so than other things that are somewhat similar in their content, right? Like, I get why vampires are cool.
Duh.
Like, obviously. So I kind of understand those things, and I'm interested in talking about those things, the reasons why that is. But, like, why this story, why this set of books, why these movies, rather than any other, like, vampiric content, got so huge and was, like, so affecting to so many people.
Well, it is. And I think this is, like, maybe the first time I've framed it this way for myself. It's, like, a deeply American book. Because it is coming from, like, a Mormon tradition, which is also, like, a very American institution, both, like, historically and also just, like, philosophically.
And aesthetically, honestly.
Yeah. It's got all that kind of as a background note.
Yeah.
And also I think, like, the sexual politics of it are, like, one, they're Mormon, so, like, that whole baggage.
Right.
And two, like, America in general has, like, a hard time navigating that in a way that's not extreme in one direction or the other.
Right.
So I think it maybe did tap into, like, that very specific cultural undercurrent that we don't always acknowledge.
I think that's a really good point.
It appealed to the people who, like, are, like, fully inside of that kind of Mormon and Christian and, like, sort of hardline old school conservatism.
Right.
And then it also appealed to people who are, like, fully outside of that, and people who are just like, I'm into vampires, I'm into this, like, deeply intense emotion that's happening, I'm into this more complicated than you usually encounter in a vampire narrative relationship to sex.
Yeah, and that's saying something.
Yes.
That brings up a good point, which is that the vast, vast majority of cultural content about vampires is about Europe, or is about Europeans who have gone elsewhere, sort of emigres to the United States. The concept of the vampire as a being that comes from Central or Eastern Europe,
Yes.
and then gradually makes their way westward. Even though there are folklore traditions of vampire-like creatures all over the world, but very much this specifically Eastern European idea, sort of like, ooh, Romania, like that's where vampires come from.
So it's like this weird sort of Balkan racism in one direction, but then also functions as like parasitic aristocracy. Like it's a very potent metaphor, just like for whiteness.
Yeah.
Which I think it also often gets used for, like, partly because they're supposed to be pale.
Yeah.
And then also because it is a very potent, like, this old, moneyed, like, sort of decadent and sumptuous, like, old world thing. Like,
Totally.
our touchstone for things that are old does usually go to Europe, even though that's, like, a little silly.
Right, because there are old things
older
everywhere.
places.
But that it kind of fits into this idea of Europe, and then also kind of distinctions between Eastern and Western Europe, and also these weird interstitial areas of like what is Central Europe as a concept.
Yeah,
what are these
it gets
locations?
this like weird Orientalism thing that's happening that doesn't ever actually make it to Asia.
Right, like
What's
Are-
that all about?
Are Russians Europeans or not? A question that I feel like every Russian filmmaker ever has tried to address and no one has ever had an answer
Right,
to.
because I think the answer is just like, nah, bro, they're Russian.
Right. And then you get all these kind of fluctuating borders and like kind of complicated national identities and complicated ethnic identities.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think the idea of vampires is very tied up in that, but then, and then also in these very classed things.
Yes.
And then also as like a metaphor for disease, right? Like that's
Yes.
if people are wasting away and dying in your village, it is less frightening to imagine that there is like one creeper going around sucking everybody's blood than like there's a disease that anyone could catch at any time and everyone
Right,
would
like
die.
the illusion of agency is comforting, even if that agency is someone trying to kill you on purpose.
Right, because then you can go to the graveyard and you can dig up the body and you can set it on fire, do whatever you need to do, depending on your local traditions.
Yes.
And then everything will be okay. As opposed to, we don't have penicillin yet and we're all gonna die. Part of what's so compelling about vampires, right, is because they function really well as metaphors for these huge things. Like, for disease, for, like, the concepts of mortality and, like, attraction to and repulsion from mortality. And then, like, also, like, adolescence and puberty and, like, sexual awakening. And also, like, ideas of, like, the foreign and kind of, like, exoticism. And also, like, sometimes this sort of, like, blurring of the boundaries between the human and the non-human, or the human and the animal, and like transformation into shit. So it does a lot of metaphoric work as a format.
I think American Vampire is actually going to be a very useful way for us to approach this text.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe going to be a good way to like give it context as like a cultural object.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Especially because Utah, particularly, and like, because I know it's not set in Utah, but like Mormonism is inextricable from Utah as a location. It's such like an American landscape.
Yeah.
And the idea of like going to find this land that was like, it's very tied up in this kind of like manifest destiny-esque narrative of like strapping young frontiersmen going to find the land that shall be for their people, and like low-key steal it from all the indigenous people that are already there.
It's like, right, like what if no one owned land? What if, you know, first of all, jot that down.
Property is theft.
Go.
Also, go home.
Like literally go back to your house.
Yeah. There's something so deeply American about the story of Mormonism that is not true of like most of Christianity, right? Most of Christianity is tied to these kind of like European storylines and Middle Eastern storylines.
Yes. Because like even evangelical Christianity, like as much as it is very much an American phenomenon, like you can trace it back to Europe, like without trying very hard.
Right. Exactly.
Which like is also, I'm sure, true of Mormonism, but like
but their like founding narrative is one that takes place
like a very
in
different
this country.
Yes.
And not that long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so something about it like being in the context of this religion that is like both very old in that it's like a form of Christianity, but also very new and very tied to like the idea of
And also
like,
like
America.
sort of revisionist.
It like does kind of tie into like how a certain kind of cult-like behavior and a certain obsession with like secret societies of a certain type is also very American. Especially, I think, the further west into this country you get.
Something about that desert, man.
Yeah, like something about just like when you start getting towards the Pacific Ocean,
It's
you just
like,
like
oh, we're running out of
you
land.
just want to like believe in some crazy shit.
Yeah, I accept that.
I mean,
well,
you know,
Twilight's Washington,
Yeah.
which is not like SoCal levels of cult, but they got some numbers. I mean, in this particular text, it's like the goofiest possible explanation, which is that it's like rainy.
yes, because vampires don't like the sun.
Yeah, it's not very bright. Not a lot of sun. But I guess also something that is going to be relevant in these books, and it is also, I think, important for this like framing of the text, is that there is a very large indigenous population in the Pacific Northwest, particularly in Washington.
And is that addressed at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's, I mean, a character that you meet very early on are like people who like live on the reservation and is like her dad's friend. Major characters throughout the books. The degree to which the book handles those characters well is like maybe not for me to be like the final say on. I think that like some parts are good, some parts are less good. It's probably not like the most careful representation of an actual real tribe that I have read in fiction or nonfiction. But like demographically speaking, like that is an accurate part of like what that part of the country is like. And also I think that presence also ties into this idea of like America writ large.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about like America's presentation of itself as a young country without a lot of history, when there are cultural communities here that have been here
For like many thousands of years.
right, and so
Like
that
direct negation of that self-conceit.
exactly, it's like, oh, we're the baby country,
It's
like we're young and powerful and without a past,
yep, nothing but blank slates.
when that's clearly not true. And I guess the introduction of like immortal beings into that environment is like a sort of ludicrously exaggerated example of that.
Sure.
All spaces have history.
Yeah.
From like a logistics point of view, I guess we should talk about how we want to do this thing.
Yeah, I guess. Let me take a look at that bad boy.
Yeah.
And see like
It's like a hefty,
hefty.
book. It's got a very like sort of Snow White evocative cover design.
Right, it's a good cover.
Yeah, it like
The font's
looks,
a little goofy, but I think that's just because it's so iconic.
right. Like we've now spent too much time with it, so
yeah,
we now
but
know.
like, man, as a person who's like really into book covers, this is some good shit.
Yeah, it's a very goth book cover.
It's an extremely goth book
It
cover.
like makes me
It
want
like
to,
caught my eye in the airport, and I was like, "What's going on there?"
and it does just make me think about fairy tales, which feels relevant.
Yes, exactly. So the book itself is $4.98. This bad boy's like 500 pages. I'm gonna have to also. Oh yeah, she really started this out with Genesis. My girl does not know what subtlety is. I love her.
I appreciate the brazenness of that.
Right, like if we're gonna do it, just do it. All right, so there's 24 chapters. Do we want to do 888?
Yeah. Are we gonna call it American Vampire?
I think we have to.
I feel great about that.
Good work, team.
Yeah, good job. Sick. All right, I think we can stop recording.